But before we do that, having talked about the fact that this is an appearance, and remembering some of the philosophic tradition of the last century, which we mentioned, look at number 5, which is on page 2. Again, from volume 1. You will notice that I have taken all of these quotations from volume 1 because basically these are dealing with the fundamental principles which then are exhibited or witnessed in the human development. To put it another way, and perhaps in a scientific way, and to use a phrase that I came to from Fritz Kunz, so I have to attribute it to him, man is the chief test object of the universe. It's a kind of scientific phrase, but it's, I think, a very accurate one. Every field of existence is known by its action upon objects within the field. And so man is the test object of the whole universe. And this is why the psychology is so important. It's the reflection of the metaphysics, but it works out then as a behavioral mode, a mode of conduct, which is an ethic. And this is really what, to me, is most important. How do we live our lives because of this metaphysical position? So, noticing that the universe is indeed a reflection, an emanation, an appearance, the pure object, apart from consciousness, is unknown to us. And this, imagine making that statement 100 years ago, you see. From one point of view, this is Kantian, isn't it? Very much Kantian. From another point of view, today, we know that any observation of the material universe, of the physical universe, certainly at the subatomic level, is influenced by the observer. So that the pure object is unknown to consciousness. One cannot observe the subatomic particles without affecting the subatomic particles. The very observation changes them, and consequently Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy and so on. And Wheeler's, Dr. John Wheeler's marvelous statement, the observer and the observed are indeed, we live in a participatory universe. They are one. A statement made by Krishnamurti, that the thinker is the thought, you see. So here she is saying it. The pure object, apart from consciousness, is unknown to us while living on the plane of our three-dimensional world, as we know only the mental states it excites in the perceiving ego. And everything we look at excites a state of consciousness within us. Now, how we look at it governs then what that state of consciousness is. If I look at you and say, well, you're very different from me. You obviously, you have green hair and red eyes and 4 arms and so on. So obviously you're very different. And this excites not only a mental state, but an emotional state. I don't like people with green hair and red eyes and 4 arms and so on. I'm uncomfortable with such people and so on. Or I'm attracted to such people. And so we begin to develop this relationship, do we not? And so long, she continues, so long as the contrast of subject and object endures, to wit, as long as we enjoy our 5 senses and no more, and notice, enjoy them, you see, not just use them, but we rather enjoy them, and do not know how to divorce our all-perceiving ego, the higher self, from the thraldom of these senses, so long will it be impossible for the personal ego to break through the barrier which separates it from a knowledge of things in themselves. Now that, of course, is the Kantian statement. One cannot know the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, or substance. That ego And she's talking now about the personal ego. That ego, progressing in an arc of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of every plane. We have to really experience every field of our being. And so when we had the principles on the board yesterday, those principles become functional through upadhis, as we said, or through vestures, through containers which nourish them. But it is that way that we do come into the whole process of becoming, remembering always the identity that underlies it. But now we become conscious of it. This is a marvelous statement. That ego, that personal ego, progressing in an arc of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of every plane. Now that doesn't mean, and this I think we have to be careful about, there is a passage in Light on the Path, for example, which it is said when it was first published became very much misunderstood, that everyone had to sort of go through all of the experiences of being drunk. Today we might say of being addicted to drugs and undergoing every experience, going to prison and being a criminal and a rapist and prostitute and heaven only knows what all. But it was not that. But what is the genuine experience of every level of consciousness? It's not becoming that, but what is the experience of every level of consciousness? Certainly, you see, are we aware of what it really is to have a physical vehicle? And the necessity for having a physical vehicle, and the necessity for being able to function at every level of consciousness. What is the experience of it? So one has to be careful. This doesn't mean you have to, really sink into the gutter and perform every evil act. One doesn't have to become a murderer or any of the other bank forger or whatever you say. But what is the experience of those levels? But not till the unit is merged in the all, whether on this or any other plane, and subject and object alike vanish in the absolute negation of the nirvanic state. Now notice, then she adds, negation again only from our plane. It is not negation, truly. Nirvana is not negation. Although it's from our level, it looks as though it is a wiping out, an extinguishing. But not till this is scaled the peak of omniscience, the knowledge of things in themselves, and the solution of the yet more awful riddle approached, before which even the highest Dhyani Chohan must bow in silence and ignorance, the unspeakable mystery of that which is called by the Vedantins the Parabrahman. It's a magnificent statement, isn't it? Because here, you see, we cannot know the pure object in itself, the reality in itself. But we can come to know that which underlies it. Scaling the peak of omniscience, the knowledge of things in themselves. This, of course, was a direct contradiction of the Kantian philosophy. Wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would, not of Schopenhauer.
Not of Schopenhauer, no. And Ken has reminded me, of course, that I have overlooked Schopenhauer. I shouldn't have. A very strong influence, of course. But it was Kant who really was the dominant figure. And we pointed that out. This was the philosophical context in which HPB wrote. Very much the dominant, because from Kant on, all Western philosophy really did change. And everything from the period of Kant on had to be referred, in a sense, to Kant's concepts, philosophy. It really did. And so he had a strong influence. The great philosophers I mentioned the first day, the great philosopher of evolution, who was prominent in England at this time, was Herbert Spencer, and HPB was much influenced not influenced in the sense of accepting, but influenced in the sense that she had to speak to what Spencer was saying. She had to refer, and she does in the Secret Doctrine, to the German idealists, as we've mentioned, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, and criticized the Hegelian philosophy. She was therefore had to use Spencer. These were the philosophers known, very much known, dominant in her time. And so she has to speak to the Kantian proposition, because the Kantian proposition, to which Schopenhauer, of course, spoke, and which he answered very effectively, but the Kantian position had to be addressed, and so she addresses it very clearly, and says, yes, at this level it is true, you cannot know the Ding an sich, the thing in itself, but, if you know the nature of what it is to be man, what it is to be human, if you understand the principles that man is more than the physical, the personal ego, more than this, then one can come to this knowledge.
Can I make one point to it? Mm-hmm. Somewhere in your lectures on volume 1, you talked about the one thing. Mm-hmm. And the one thing she said is like, one thing is man, and man is born of Mother Earth, Mother Moon, and Father Sun. Mm-hmm. Some such sense, about stanza 35 or somewhere in there. And that idea is a whole concept. Mm-hmm. When you take the thing out of it with Kappa, mm-hmm. and you put it back into atomic physics,
yeah.
Then you have only the reality of the self.
Only the reality of
the self.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The big self.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just a comment.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's
yes.
where I'm at. I'm worried.
Very true. You see, in the notes that were left to us by one of her students, Commander Bowen, which I've mentioned, which were published later in a booklet, Madame Blavatsky on How to Study Theosophy. That, of course, was not the title. That was a title given to it very much later when they were published. Not even when they were originally published, because they were simply originally published as notes by Commander Bowen of HPV's classes. But later they were published as a little booklet, How to Study Theosophy. Commander Bowen reports that in her class, HPV commented and emphasized to her students, existence is one thing, not any collection of things linked together. The atom, the man, the God are each separately, as well as collectively, absolute being in their last analysis. That is their real individuality. And she emphasized, as I've already emphasized in some of these quotations, it is this idea which must be held always in the background of the mind to form the basis for every conception that arises from the study of the Secret Doctrine. And Commander Bowen said, she added, it is clear that this fundamental one existence or absolute being must be the reality in every form there is. And we can say, therefore, from this point of view, the universe is a holograph in which each part reveals the presence of the whole. Each part. And now this is a new way of thinking, a new way of seeing, if you like, that the universe is indeed a holograph. And every part, every, as she said, atom, man, God, are each separately as well as all collectively this reality. So whatever you look at, now what kind of ethic does this lead to, you think, from this point of view? As we grow into this, what kind of ethic? That everything you look at, you see the reality in it. What the Buddhists of course call its dharma nature, its truthfulness, its underlying truthfulness. To look at everything, every one, you know. I mean, maybe it's, you know, there are certain things that I find it difficult to look at. Cockroaches, for example. I find it very difficult to see the underlying absolute reality in the cockroach. I must admit I found that a bit difficult when I was living in India. And I find it difficult even in Ojai if a cockroach invades our kitchen where it doesn't belong, you know. But and I suppose there are times too when it becomes very difficult to see this in mosquitoes, you know. But this is the point, that the fundamental one existence or absolute being must be the reality in every form there is. So can we begin to see this primary fact, one existence present in every existence? And I think out of that there does arise an ethic that is challenging, very challenging, a glorious ethic. It's the highest ethic, the ethic of oneness, which is compassion. I don't feel much compassion for cockroaches, I will admit that. And many times I don't feel much compassion for mosquitoes. But, and there are certain other forms that I wish the one reality had taken another course and developed some pleasanter forms in any event. So here we have this direct statement that we are progressing in an art of ascending subjectivity, must exhaust the experience of everything. Well, speaking of this way of seeing, we can look at item 4 then, which I think is a beautiful statement, because this then does awaken this new mode of knowing and this way of seeing. The one being, this is the ultimate reality, is the noumenon of all the noumena, which we know must underlie phenomena. That behind all phenomena, behind all appearances, must be that which creates the appearance, if you like. If everything is an appearance, phenomenal, transient, then there must be that which creates it. And that which creates it is the noumenon, or the noumena. And the one noumenon is the ultimate reality. Therefore gives them, and give them whatever shadow of reality they possess, but which we have not the senses or the intellect to cognize at present. Now notice that, at present, because of course in anthropogenesis she points very clearly to the further development of other senses. We have 5 senses, there is to be a 6th and a 7th. And so, while at present we do not have the senses to cognize them, this may still be in our future, and certainly do not have the awakened mind to cognize it. And then she uses a magnificent metaphor, a beautiful, beautiful metaphor. And as some of you know, I am fascinated with metaphor. I think I've mentioned it before. But really, everything is metaphor. Everything is a metaphor for the ultimate reality, however we want to see it. So she uses here a beautiful metaphor. The impalpable atoms of gold scattered through the substance of a ton of auriferous quartz may be imperceptible to the naked eye of the miner. Yet he knows that they are not only present there, but that they alone give his quartz any appreciable value. We may look at a piece of auriferous quartz and not see the gold in it at all. We may say, well, it's very beautiful, it's very nice, but it really doesn't have much value. I can use it as a doorstop, or I can use it as a paperweight. But the miner, knowing the value, perceiving in it, sees the value. And this relation of the gold to the quartz may faintly shadow forth that of the noumenon to the phenomenon. But the miner knows what the gold will look like when extracted from the quartz, whereas the common mortal can form no conception of the reality of things separated from the Maya which veils them and in which they are hidden. And how little we do see the value in everything. In everything. There is then that real value. I think it's a beautiful statement and a wonderful metaphor, and it should make us aware. Can we begin This is a kind of ethic, isn't it? Can we begin to look at everyone, everything, and appreciate its value, appreciate the value, the gold that is there? Sometimes it's not easy to see that. In the reading of the Mahatma letters, I think again and again the adept teachers writing to Mr. Sinnott would point out, well, yes, from your point of view, from the point of view of an educated Englishman who really felt superior to the common herd of India, from this point of view, and Mr. Hume's point of view, yes, you did not recognize what was right in front of you. You didn't even see us when we appeared, as it were. There are many instances where the masters seem to say this to Mr. Sinnott. Would you say this is true, Virginia? Wouldn't you say that's true, that they again and again the masters emphasize that Sinnott and Hume were not seeing the value in certain people, in certain individuals who were brought before them. There is again and again this emphasis, but you didn't recognize that this person was there. And we have this in many stories. What is that beautiful story in Christianity? Of the man who did not. Of course, we have the story of the Good Samaritan, but also when did I see you and not recognize you? When did I feed you, and when did I give you water, and so on? When did I clothe you? And it was because it was in every form, however that form seemed to be, that there was the Christ presence. The other wise man, yes, thank you, yes. I should remember that from Felix reading.
Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me.
Yes, thank you, yes. I'm glad Felix is here. Yes, I should have remembered it when, in that wonderful story, in Henry Van Dyke, isn't it, the other wise man, and the fact that the fourth wise man did these things, but did not realize. But can we realize, can we become aware that in everyone and everything there is that Christ presence, that Buddha presence, that reality, that underlying reality, the gold? Can we recognize the gold in the block of quartz? Well, I think these particular quotations which I've given you illustrate then some of the fundamental principles which are built into us as a metaphysic, but which we have to realize in the process of becoming part of the growth of our own being, and that they do involve a self-responsibility. And therefore, the final one, item 7, which I think gives us also a very real key to one of the fundamental principles of the occult philosophy. The universe is worked and guided from within outward. Now that has a number of correlations. The universe is worked and guided from within outward. As above, so it is below. As in heaven, so on earth. And man, the microcosm and miniature copy of the macrocosm, is the living witness to this universal law and to the mode of its action. And one could add there that man is the living witness to every one of the occult laws. Break them and we suffer. Follow them and we grow. We grow through suffering too, of course. We see that every external motion, act, gesture, whether voluntary or mechanical, organic or mental, is produced and preceded by internal feeling or emotion, will or volition, and thought or mind. So can we become aware of this?
Yes. It occurs to me that we can't break a law.
No.
We break ourselves against it.
Well, that's a good way of putting it, yes. I think Virginia's point is very well taken. We cannot break a law, but we break ourselves against it. Yes, yes, the law cannot be broken. The law can never be broken, but we can certainly stub our toes against it and knock our shins against it and, fall down and walk into it.
It says somewhere that we came from it and returned to it. Does that mean the end of the reincarnation process?
One can take this at a number of different levels. The question is that, this is in item 2, that we emanated from this universal reality, Param Atman and Parabrahman, and we must someday return to it. I think one can take this at a variety of levels. It can be at the end of the entire Manvantara. It can be the end of the cycle of reincarnations when one is liberated, as it were, from the necessity, but one voluntarily then returns as the Bodhisattva, the Nirmanakaya. These are technical terms which we haven't gone into, known to many of you, however. So I think it can take place at many different levels. And ultimately, in the, what shall we say, the conclusion of a whole Manvantara. Yes.
Well, I always give a rather simplistic explanation in my own mind of the ocean, the vastness of the ocean, and the wave rising up. It has to return.
It has to return.
And so the recognition of the return is possible maybe for us, which for the wave. But in other words, we think for a while we're separate.
That's right.
And then the truth is that we're nothing without the ocean.
Without the ocean. I think that's a very beautiful analogy, because if the wave were to think of itself as separate, it isn't separate. And yet we speak of the waves of an ocean, don't we? As though they were separate. But they would not be there except for the ocean into which they return. Here it's as though the whole ocean is consciousness, and the wave becomes self-conscious and returns that much of awareness, if we can put it this way, of self-consciousness to the ocean, and therefore never fully loses its identity, but achieves its identity because of the ocean. It's I think, a very wonderful concept that is presented to us throughout. Yes?
Joy, I'd like to tell you about another analogy, which I'm aware of because I became an artist. I remember the first thing I learned when I took art appreciation was the two opposing color theories, which is, in the pigment theory, the absence of all colors the presence of all colors make black, and the absence of all color leaves your white paper. That's a pigment theory. But with the light theory, if you take away all the light, it's black or dark, and if you put all the light there, you have all of the colors like in a rainbow. The light is refracted through a rainbow, and so they're exactly opposite. But so it's like looking in a mirror, and when you look in a mirror, things are just reversed. But everything is there.
Very good. Thank you, Doug. There are many analogies you begin to think about, aren't they? And out of our personal experience, becoming an artist, for example, you became aware of that. If you had not been involved in art, you might not have been aware of that effect, that there is that reversal. This is so very true. But out of it all, I suggest, then, is this ethic, an ethic that arises when there is a growing consciousness of our rootedness in the one, the radical unity. An ethic, I think, founded on a conscience of concern, as I like to call it, that there must awaken in every one of us, because of this metaphysic, because of these this fundamental universal principle, which is presented in the Secret Doctrine. And everything else flows from that there must awaken in us a conscience of concern for everything, the ethic of self and every self responsibility. It's the essence, I think, of the whole wisdom tradition, wisdom religion that we have been given. And there's a wonderful statement by HPB in the introduction, which I did not put among these because it's not so much a principle as a description of the situation in her day in which she wrote. But I think it may even be a description of the situation today. She said, the world of today, and this is as true 100 years later as it was in 1888, the world of today, in its mad career towards the unknown, which it is too ready to confound with the unknowable, interesting statement, is rapidly progressing on the material plane of spirituality. And this is an interesting contradiction almost in terms, the material plane of spirituality. We have materialized the spiritual. We have concretized. We have brought it into a kind of exhibitionism almost. It has now become, she says, it has now become a vast arena, a true valley of discord and of eternal strife, a necropolis, which is, of course, a city of death, a necropolis, wherein lie buried the highest and the most holy aspirations of our spirit soul. And therefore, it is our responsibility, it seems to me, and this is why we study this, to disentomb those holy aspirations. This, of course, is repeated in one of the great legends of the Holy Grail, the story of Lancelot, who was called on to disentomb the... he's told there is an adventure on which he must go, and he asks about the adventure. And he's told that there is a voice coming from the cemetery, from a tombstone, and he must quiet that voice. It's a beautiful story. It's part of the Grail legends. And he does it. Now, each one of us can be a Lancelot and listen to the cry of humanity that is coming from the necropolis of today. There is a cry. We get this also in the beautiful works of Nikos Kazantzakis, the modern Greek writer, to whom I've referred on other occasions, that the first thing that humanity must do, that must awaken in each of us, is hearing the cry of humanity. And that is hearing the cry of the entombed God. And we become then saviors of God, as Kazantzakis put it. That can we hear, in the midst of all the cacophony of the world, the cry of humanity. This is indeed, I think, what is being told us here. As she says, wherein lie buried the highest and the most holy aspirations of our spirit soul. And I think we have to meet that challenge, to disentomb the aspirations, the really sacred aspirations of humanity. So we have, as I was thinking, as I've always been thinking about the Secret Doctrine, I think the two words that to me summed up are being and responsibility through the process of becoming. Being and responsibility. In one of the contemporary books of scientific theories, the book by John Briggs and David Peat called A Looking Glass Universe, delightful book that summarizes many of the contemporary scientific theories in physics, in biology, and in psychology, brain research, and so on. They put the matter this way. Nature herself is a web of living energy, each object a mirror made up of strand upon strand of all that is. Now that is
3 words.
of all that is. Nature herself is a web of living energy, each object a mirror, made up of strand upon strand of all that is. Now, could any statement be more theosophical? You feel that this is a statement that HPB might have written. But this is a statement by two scientists who have given a very perceptive analysis of the contemporary state of modern science. And therefore, it is, I think, incumbent upon us to realize the responsibility that we have. A responsibility which is very much pointed up in some beautiful lines which the Mahatma K.H. wrote to Mr. Sinnott, or quoted to him. Since there is hope for man, only in man, I would not let one cry whom I could save. That's to disentomb the holy aspirations. It's a law of moral responsibility that goes beyond what is usually talked of as contemporary ethics and morality. A genuine self-responsibility. So let me conclude. I think there is time just to conclude in this with a wonderful statement, therefore, that that we find in HPB's final work, The Voice of the Silence. And I must say, I always recommend that in the study of the Secret Doctrine, one always studies the Voice of the Silence at the same time, or uses it, because the two complement each other. And in the Voice of the Silence, we have, now bend thy head and listen well. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? Well, if one really studies the Secret Doctrine, if one really comes to the heart of it, that is the message. Live the life, if you would come to the wisdom, and living the life means hearing the aspirations of humanity that have become entombed in the contemporary world, and releasing those aspirations for further growth. So, with that, we can conclude. Thank you all very, very